Okay, my friends, shocker du jour, your money back once again. Velikovsky, who was my hero, claimed, as all of the ancient texts were written, that the feared god Jupiter gave birth to a fiery comet, which later turned out to be Venus, that smote Earth and killed basically everything on Earth. It created a gigantic flood, and then went around and destroyed Mars. And that is where it came out of Jupiter, the great red spot. And you are going to say, oh, that can't possibly be. Well, let's look into it. Okay, so you obviously say, Roger, that's just a storm. That is not where planets emerge from. I say, no, it's not a storm. It's literally a vagina. And as Ovid said, they could change sexes, they could do anything they want. And Jupiter gave birth to a fiery comet, which later turned out to be Venus. When it came out, it was just spectacular. Now, where would it emerge from? Well, from the Great Red Spot. That is exactly how big it would be coming out of there. And what is the Great Red Spot? Well, there it is right there. This is artist's rendition, obviously, but this is basically what it would look like. Now, would it come out of a vagina? Well, yes, it did. Now, if you don't want to see planet porn, you should just stop right now, because you're going to see this is a vagina on Jupiter. There's no question about it. And then I'm going to show you anatomically a vagina, which is extremely graphic. So, again, forewarned. So here we go. We are going to see this coming from where? Well, coming from an enormously giant vagina. Now, this is a vagina. These are the different layers of tissue. And there's all different names: labia majora, majorna, all kinds of stuff. And then the urethra and the vaginal canal and the ripples and all of that stuff, the hairline. Now the real, and you say, oh, that could just be because it just looks like clouds swirling. Well, let's take that for, let's say that's the case. What's this doing there? You say, well, what is that? I said, well, I'm glad you asked. That, my friends, is the tag that tags a body part into another body part. And in this case, that tag tags the vagina into the pelvis area. Now, it is swirling. We can see the swirl is coming this way because the clouds are coming over this bump. The Venus Mons, it's a bump. And as it comes over that bump, it swirls. So it is swirling around here. So we're going to get a natural little bit of this, a little bit of this. And on the other side is this. The tissue is being pulled this way. This side is being pulled this way. You see it? And on this side it's being pulled this way. But it's because the air is flowing over that bump. Primarily this side, because that's more towards the equator. Now let me show you what it looks like as it comes by. Here it is right here. The clouds on Venus are very, very dense. It's extremely heavy, gaseous atmosphere. As that comes this way and the bump goes this way, the bump hits up against this clouds and they swirl around her. And as a consequence, it does turn this way, and they always said, oh, it's just a swirling storm. No, it's because the bump has to pass its way through this. That's the Venus Mons. Now, so that accounts for the swirliness, and by the time it gets back around here again, it's already condensed back down and sort of stops swirling, and then it swirls again, and it goes around. That's the storm, and that is the vagina. Now, again, I told you, you're going to see some planet porn here, and this is it. Now, here's the real unbelievable thing about this. That little tab right there, all right, that is the latch. And every body part has this. I've discovered this in my mud fossils. And these two little dots are where the fluids that are in the fascia here transfer through this. I found it in my mud fossils. Every one of them has it. When they have that latch, they have the 2 dots, exactly the same. Now let me show you a anatomical vagina, and it's going to be graphic. Here it comes. Boom. That is the latch we were just looking at, right there. That's the latch. All right, you see that? That's it right there. Now, there is going to be fluids that run from the fascia that surrounds this particular body part. Every body part has its own type of fascia. It depends on how much elasticity you need, like in your heart and your lungs. They're always doing this, and you know, the vagina does a lot of that too. You know, it's just what it is. And so you're going to have a certain type of fascia around there. And that fluids that are in that fascia have to pass through this gate into the next layer, which is going to be the fascia that's in the pelvis. It's different. This surrounds muscle. This surrounds some very specific tissues that are obviously different than muscle. That's the best way I can put it. Okay, the claims Velikovsky made were outrageous, and they could not see the things we can see now, and they didn't have the information we have now. This is Venus. This is literally an electric discharge into Venus, not out of Venus. This is a right into Venus. Venus spins backwards, and that comes into play later. We'll talk about that. But this was where Venus impacted Mars. And what happened to Mars as a result of this impact? Well, Mars did not do too well either. This is wider than the United States. This trench, and it's deep, and it's wide, and Venus is done. And its electric field, its magnetic field discharged into Venus, causing that discharge, and it lost its atmosphere at the same time. Without an atmosphere, you can't create a magnetic field. It's just not going to happen. There's no atmosphere, there's no scrub. You have the tiniest little field that just sits right on top of the edge here. But usually you have a nice puffy bunch of stuff that's scrubbing through space, which Harvard yesterday or a few days ago admitted, yes, space is saturated with particles and light slows down coming through space. Huge announcement nobody's heard about. All right, and they're still talking about this web capturing all of these things for such and such a distance. They have no idea where things are anymore because space is clouded with a fog called atomic vapor. Now, Velikovsky also claims that Venus almost hit Earth, stopped it from rotating, and caused a massive impact somewhere. I have looked all over for that impact, and I think I might know where it is. Somebody tipped me off and said, take a look in the Midwest out here. And when I started looking, this is just basically a mess. And that mess is like this. That mess is this. You see that? That's some kind of intestinal tissue. This was ripped the guts right out of some gigantic creature. And I don't care what anybody says. The whole universe is filled with gigantic creatures. Just exactly what they said in the ancient texts. And that is the same as this stomach lining this guy is walking on out there. They call it pillow basalt. Well, I call it stomach lining that turned hard and was, from a fairly large creature. These things are from gigantic creatures, and they are everywhere. And on Mars, it is the same thing. This is the Mars crab. Hold on one second. Okay, my outstanding friends, this is going to be fabulous. Immanuel Velikovsky, who is my hero, wrote Worlds in Collision. It was a book, 1950. And his central ideas were that ancient mythology and biblical events describe real, global catastrophes caused by planetary near collisions in the solar system, especially involving Venus and Mars and Earth. Venus was originally a comet ejected from Jupiter, which passed near Earth multiple times around the second millennium BC, specifically about 1500 BC. Now, here's what he claims happened. The near collisions caused great floods, a worldwide flood, earthquakes, terrible earthquakes, plagues, also the parting of the Red Sea and Exodus, because this is when this global catastrophes were occurring. The sun literally stood still. Joshua claimed the sun stood still as the water kept moving around the earth. Globally, just a gigantic flood. Fire from the sky and more. Venus eventually settled into a stable orbit and became the planet we know today. Later, Mars made near passes to Earth around the 8th century BC, again causing disasters recorded in mythology and history. Now, where are we going here? All right, Harvard says, yes, the oceans boiled. They all did. Stanford, LSU. The atmospheric temperature exceeded 500 degrees Celsius for weeks. Now they found these spherules in the ocean. They think it was vaporized rock. Well, I got news for them. It is interstitium balls. They're all over. They're everywhere. They call them Moki marbles. They call them Mars blueberries. They're the layer, and they are in the Mars Morse code. I'm going to show you that too, because everything is biology, and all these ancient stories about gods battling other gods in the heavens appears to be true. And Venus was ejected from Jupiter's great red spot, as I will show you. All right, so academia attacked him and forced him to take his book off the bookshelves. Velikovsky drew heavily from the ancient texts, myth, religious scriptures, folklore, all over the world. And he went there, and he went to the libraries, the museums, the cultural centers, the monuments, the carvings. He talked to the people that carried these stories down. And all of them, everywhere in the world he went to. And he treated them as factual accounts of astronomical events. Everybody had the same story. And they all had the same time frame. A little twist here, a little twist there. But they all had a gigantic flood, giants, dragons, monsters, battles in the heavens. All of the stuff, every one of them had. He rejected mainstream view. They were just symbolic. They were just religious. They were just making up stories. Now, the rejection from the scientific community, astronomers, physicists, and geologists overwhelmingly rejected Velikovsky's ideas. Yes, they went crazy. They said his claims violated the laws of physics. We got laws, you can't do this. Venus, as a former comet ejected from Jupiter, is astronomically implausible, you idiot. No evidence exists of recent major changes in planetary orbits or cosmic collisions in historical times. Well, we're going to look into that in a second. Carl Sagan was the worst of the worst. Carl Sagan and others publicly debated. No, they didn't. They were nasty. And they refuted Velikovsky's arguments. Still, Worlds in Collision became a bestseller and gained a cult following, especially among those interested in alternative history or catastrophism. They made him take his book off the bookshelves. Macmillan withdrew the book after 2 months. And they gave it, eventually Doubleday took over. But by that time, they had destroyed him and made him look like he was just an insane person. Now, Harvard now agrees the oceans did boil, just like Velikovsky said. But back then, academia, particularly prominent scientists tied to Harvard, pressured Macmillan, the publisher, to withdraw Worlds in Collision shortly after its release, even though it was #1 on the bestseller list for 11 weeks in a row and 27 weeks total on the bestseller list. Now, Harvard's opposition, they led a campaign prior to and immediately after the publication. They threatened a boycott of Macmillan's textbook division if the book remained listed under science in their catalog. And they just withdrew. Macmillan's response, after fears of a university-level boycott, they sold the rights to Worlds in Collision just 8 weeks after publication, shifting it from Macmillan to Doubleday, which had no textbooks. So the academics couldn't destroy them. But they were probably considered, Doubleday was probably considered like a comic book thing compared to Macmillan. In the fallout, the controversy led to finding or resignations, firings, and resignations. Macmillan editor was dismissed. Gordon Atwater of Hayden Planetarium lost his position for supporting Velikovsky. Anybody tried to be open, they destroyed him. Academics, primarily from Harvard, organized an active campaign to remove the book from Macmillan's scientific category, effectively forcing a withdrawal. And they never let him off the mat. They had him tied to the mat, and they never let him up until he died. Now, if you read Ovid, he wrote Metamorphosis, and the first 2 lines out of 12,000 lines said, I intend to speak of entities changed into new entities. Because they were gods. They could change themselves into anything they want. Mushrooms, ants, planets, galaxies, rivers, anything. And they did. And Jupiter could be a male or a female. And Jupiter did end up turning to be a female to give birth to Venus. And you say, come on, Roger, that's impossible. That's crazy. I said, well, I showed you Venus impacted with Mars. I believe that's a pretty good evidence. And as all the ancient texts said, and it almost hit Earth, causing a total catastrophe. Now, where did it come from? Well, I say it came from the Great Red Spot. And you say, well, can you show me something like that? I said, well, a little bit, yeah. This is what the Earth, or, excuse me, Venus, would look like emerging from the Great Red Spot. Okay, I interrupted many times during this, but this was about Bennu. I think I showed it, maybe not. We went out and spent a ton of money, billions of dollars, National Science Foundation, Smithsonian, all that. They brought back a chunk of that asteroid, and it is literally muscle. I think I have shown that. Here it is right here. Sarcomeres. And I know you have seen it or will see it, or you can easily see it on my channel. It's the phospholipid membrane, sarcomeres, phospholipid membrane, more sarcomeres. They're layer after layer after layer, and that's what they are. And that is actually the specimen that they showed that they brought back. And that specimen came out of this heart. These are the valves of the heart. And they went down deep in there and picked up this chunk of actual muscle. And I show it because this is a heart muscle. I know I've shown this, and this big black line here is the tear in the heart. And these things are so enormous that this is basically the same thing. And I think this is literally the same thing. It's vein blood. It's not supposed to be there. Not in that quantity, not in that jagged type of line. It doesn't work that way. They're supposed to be like this. Now, I want to be sure that you understand everything I'm presenting here is biology, and we have that biology right here in our hands. I want to see that examined for what it is. They already know it's got all the DNA and the RNA and the uracil and 16,000 organic chemicals. These are actually muscle bundles, and these are sarcomeres. Now, they should have somebody that's got some biology, and these are the phospholipid membranes, the phosphate surprise. And that's exactly what they said. Wow, we're shocked there's phosphates in there. Well, That's because there's phosphates in between each layer of sarcomeres. Exactly what they brought back. Exactly. No difference whatsoever. There it is right there. You see it? You see it? It's quite obvious. All right. And again, it's got all the DNA, the RNA, the uracil, all that. Those don't come from nowhere. And on Mars, they have the same thing, sarcomeres. And they think it took millions of years, layer after layer after layer after layer. That's crazy. It was a creature died, and that's his muscles when he did all of the red fleshy stuff sort of eroded out. That stuff erodes out. Connective tissue, totally different. Connective tissue makes rock. Basalts basically are mostly connective tissue. Limestone, stuff like that. The hard stuff, red blood just basically runs off. And that's why it turns into mud. And this is up on Mars, and just turn it to mud. Now, I think I showed everything, but it's really important to know that we have this in our hands. All right, so why don't we ask somebody to tell us why they won't talk about this as being biological? Get a heart surgeon to look at this and to look at all of these. That right there is psyche. It's another heart. That's the tendon that wraps around the heart. These are the valves. It's got tubes coming out. That's where the tendon is in a normal heart, just right there. And down here is the bloody area. I know I've shown this and will show it again probably, but it needs to be seen. It needs to be taken seriously. This is really true stuff. And Velikovsky reported on this, and every culture in history did too. And they said there was battles in the heavens, and these are body parts in the heavens. I don't care how you cut it. I am shown over and over and over again. And this is some kind of hip joint, and that is some kind of blast of barbecue smoke coming out of that gigantic artery. That's a hip. You see it? That's a hip. That's the epiphysis and ball, and that's the hip broken off right there. All right, so that's the heart. These are the valves of the heart. The plumbing pops right off, and that's just commonplace in hearts. And psyche is the same thing. Psyche, I got somewhere around here. Well, here, this is psyche. It's a heart too. These are the valves. You see? Just like that. The top pops right off because of the iron banding, which gives you the black and the red snap part right there, right at the valves, right there. And that happens in even with when they do the autopsies of, whatever they call it, when they examine them anatomically. They've been stored for a while. The top just basically comes apart because there's iron polarities push each other apart. So that's a heart. Bennu is a heart. I mean, there was Bennu I was showing. It's all crusty looking. This one here is way, way, way bigger. This is 140 miles across, and it's a heart. And that, my friends, is a tube. That's not a crater. That is not a crater. Je comprends? Not a crater. It is a tube. And that is a tube as well. And those colors are extremely indicative of heart valves. You got two different colors side by side because that's what's in hearts. This plumbing is right next to each other, and they're totally different colors. You got black, you got yellow, and you got red. These are the oxidation states of blood. And all of these little pops, they're popped out. Those aren't impacts. Well, maybe some are, but not all of them, certainly. But as you can see, there are tubes coming out. And the reason is hearts are just saturated with blood, and they pop, 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 cooking in the sunlight. And they actually create meat smoke in space. They say space smells like steak. That's what the astronauts say when they take their suits off after a walk in space. They say, my suit smells like a sirloin because this thing's cook. Comet 67P was gushing stuff out. Absolutely amazing, the amount of barbecue gases flowing into space. And that's a hip joint. Now don't forget, we have Benyu's sample right here on Earth. They found all the DNA, the RNA, the uracil, the organic chemistry, all that. The same thing with 67P. It's a hip bone broken here across, like somewhere like this. Sometimes they fracture here, sometimes at the neck, sometimes out here. It just depends on how it got impacted and cracked. And this is out in space, and all of the fleshy stuff seems to burn off basically out in space, and you end up with the internal structures. That's what I'm saying. All right, so this is the hip joint. I believe they call this the epiphysis or something like that. But anyway, you got a neck, and there's going to be some muscles coming out here, some tendons. There's going to be a lot of blood. You need a lot of blood to service your hip and all that joint area, and there is a ton of blood, and it gushes out when the sun hits it in just exactly the right way. This goes back over 10 years ago. That is boiling off blood from an artery, and that artery is 500 feet around, and it's boiling off body gases from blood. That's the main supply, which is the artery, like a main tube coming down. Now, back here, you got all these little tiny ones. What's going on with that? Well, those are all the little blood supplies. They call them blood vessels. And they're pointing in certain directions to get to wherever they had to go, muscle and so forth, that was surrounding this hip. And I'll show you some where the muscle was coming out of here. But this, and I'll show you that too, is where the artery was. And how big this thing is just staggering. All right, this is basically, I believe, a bundle of muscle. And they break right off where they attach it. You know, well, this is probably the tendon. Okay, there's going to be tendons running this way and that way and up and so over. This, I believe, ran to muscle. That bundle came this way and it breaks right off where it attaches to the muscle. It's called abrupt transition. And this are the little rope fibers that came up to attach to the muscle, I believe. This is red powdery blood that's just was in this area servicing that muscle, which, because muscles require a lot of blood, so that would be what this is. Other than that, these tendons, this does not have a lot of blood. These are tendons. These straps, you see these? See, that's the bundle of where I believe it did attach to muscle, and the muscle came up this way to pull this back and forth. This is tendon. These strappy things are tendon, and right at the end here is where it would have attached to muscles, just like these, basically, primarily surrounding that whole joint thing, because that's a very tricky matrix of muscles and tendons to give you all that flexibility and motion and everything in that joint. It's unbelievable, the human body, absolutely incredible. All right, this is how complicated that area is in your thigh bone. And we saw the epiphysis, we saw the neck, we saw some tendon stuff wrapped around, some muscle stuff coming out of there. And that's what it is, basically. The epiphysis is basically that, and it broke over here somewhere. Now remember I told you this is absolutely enormous, 500 feet. And you can see the blood vessels down inside. And this is because the sun is hitting exactly down into it. Otherwise it doesn't cook. When we look at it, there'll be no gases coming out of it because it's not going to be like exposed to the sun the way it is here. And the same thing with these. They are exposed to the sun in such a way that the gases are cooking off. And they only cook when they get close enough to the sun to ionize the particles in here and turn them into gases. That's what this is. These are gases. They're polycyclic, aromatic hydrocarbons, which is body parts roasting in space. You see this? This is skin. This layer right here is the fluid-filled highway, which is now called the interstitium. Below that are all these tiny little balls, you see? And this layer right here, which houses your immune system. This, my friends, is basically the same as that. You come down through, let's say this is the skin, this layer right here. You see that? That layer right there. All right, and then you get down to where the membrane is down here. And then you're in the fluid-filled highway, which is right here. On the other side of the membrane is here. Then you get down into where all these little tiny balls are. Which in here, they're not tiny, they're big. But that basically is this layer of membrane. Now, this was unknown to science until 2018. Meet your interstitium, which is this white layer, a newfound organ, which is completely encloses the entire body. Now I'm going to show you something about this interstitium. I actually literally discovered this in my Mudfossils in 2015. I wrote the paper saying this fascia layer, this fluid-filled layer, protected my Mudfossils and preserved them from rotting away. Basically, it was fascia facilitated fossilization. Now, remember these little tiny balls. Remember this layer. Remember this skin. I'm going to show you how big these things get. All right, are you ready? Sit down. Sit down. Okay, so you say, Roger, how big do they get? Well, they get pretty big. Those are those balls that I was showing you, and that was the interstitium, which is the fluid-filled highway, and then you come with this a ton of layers of tissue, which they don't show it as detailed as this. What they are showing is these balls. And they're showing that literally inside of there, which you can't, it's very hard to see, they create a matrix that can be pulled and stretched and all that stuff, but it comes back to where it originated from, which is this block. So they can pull and this bag will squeeze tight, and that bag will squeeze tight, and these straps will stretch out, and then they'll come back. And if you crunch them together, they all wrinkle together. It's fine. It wrinkles together, or they pull apart. It's easy, one way or the other. Or they just sit here nice and easy, just like you're sleeping. So don't forget, these are the balls we're talking about. This is the skin, this is the fluid-filled highway, and these are the balls. Well, where are they on Earth? Well, they're right here. This is in the United Kingdom. I believe it's called Hunstanton's Beach. Hunstanton Cliffs, something like that. But it's in the United Kingdom. This is the skin. Just like the skin I showed you before. This is this one little layer right there. It's hard to see, but it's the interstitium layer. And it's this layer right here. And just below that are all the balls. So these balls are just eroding down. Those are not stromatolites. They say, oh, those are stromatolites. No, they're not. Those are interstitium balls that have dropped down as they erode away underneath the skin. Just precisely what would happen up here. If this eroded away, all the balls would be here, because they don't erode. These babies are tough, and they turn into almost like stone. And they are everywhere on Earth. I'm going to show you some places you won't even hardly believe. Well, it's probably hard to believe this too, but it is a fact. Now, so here we are. This little layer right there, it's a little more colored than what's below, and that is basically the fluid-filled highway, which says you can come down to here. But I got troops just waiting for you here. I got them all over this fluid-filled highway, and it's everywhere in the whole body. It's the biggest organ in the body now, this fluid-filled highway. And if you try to come past here, down and invade my good flesh, I will kill you. If you try to get past here, you go in here, I don't care. Skin, not a big deal. But you get past that, now we're talking big deal. Now you're talking into the flesh. And once you start infecting the flesh, now you got a sick, you're diseased. I hope that makes sense to you. But these balls are being eaten by moss, every one of them. And this is nothing more than the flesh that has turned into red clay mud. It's in the, clay brown mud. Now over here is the Moki marbles. These are the same exact as this, only they're smaller, and all of the edible stuff has been eaten away and eroded away. And these are all over out west, because there's a creature underneath here somewhere. These are just the skin. So underneath is the creature. The whole west is covered with this. The same thing here. This is just the skin. There's guts and all kinds of things down inside. That's what creates volcanoes and earthquakes and everything as the bodies decompose under the surface of the earth. And now the earth is warming up and they're going to start decomposing a lot more. We're having a lot more issues with earthquakes, volcanoes, and so forth. And it's not going to get better. As the earth continues to warm, they will continue to decompose at a faster and faster rate. Now I showed you these things. They're everywhere. Those balls are in the Moki marbles. Those are in the desert. These are up here in Alaska. They're everywhere. They're everywhere. Now, every single one of these is coated with green. That's because it came out of the ground already impregnated with this particular type of moss. Inside our bodies, there's thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of different types of species of bacteria. And this is nothing more than one of those types of deals where this particular body part is edible by this particular bacteria, which was in this creature's body when it died. You cannot have so much infected. So I could see if a bunch was green here, yes. And some over here maybe, but not 100%, not 100%, and this is 100% everywhere, and they are everywhere for miles and miles, because these are those balls that are in the skin right here. And right now they're being eaten by that moss, which was alive in this creature's body. When we're up in Alaska there, it has to be. There's no way that all of those balls can get infected like that instantaneously as soon as they thaw out. Just not happening. It was in there just waiting to become warm enough to start growing. So now you say, well, what has that got to do with Venus and Mars? Well, you saw this is muscle. That's muscle. And this is gigantic. This is on Earth. And I believe that could be a heart attack victim. I could believe it could be a heart attack victim. Now, I showed you what a heart looks like. That's a heart attack victim. Basically the same thing. Now, I showed you the balls coming out of the body flesh, and they're everywhere on Earth. Guess what? They're on Mars, too. These are called the Mars blueberry. This is the basement layer of skin. The interstitium was on top of here, and then above that was the skin. All the skin and stuff eroded away, just dusted away on Mars. It dusts. There's no water up there. And it ends up just with the blueberries laying here, just like on the Moki marbles. I showed you the Moki marbles, exact same thing. No difference whatsoever. And at some point, if all that eroded back and this became dry and all of that stuff was eaten, you'd end up with these, only they'd maybe be a little bigger. I don't know. They'd probably be bigger. So we've seen all the balls, we've seen the joints in space, we've seen the hearts in space, we've seen if Venus came out of the great red vagina. We've seen that Bennu is a heart, and we spent billions of dollars to do this. I think we should get something for our money. They should at least examine it. And then, of course, there's a Mars crab, which is all, oh, they got pareidolia, forget that, just don't even look anymore. No, that's an artery. And these are the little artery tubes, which there's a bazillion of them in there servicing the muscle. And this is the block right down there, if you see it. There it is right here. And it's servicing these sarcomeres, which is the muscle. This is just blood that's just sort of dusted out of it over the course of time because it's very dry. And the red blood just doesn't, it just doesn't harden up into like a rock. It just particulates, or it turns into mud or dust. It's different than the black blood, as you can see right here. You see this? This is the vein blood. That sucker ain't going nowhere. Inside between here, there was just a ton of the red blood, and somehow it works these muscle sarcomeres to pull together. This, I got to tell you, I think that's a heart attack victim. And this was heart attack muscle. I mean heart muscle. And the heart, it ripped it open. It's not supposed to be like that. Not supposed to be like that. There's supposed to be nice, uniform little layers between each one of them, which are called the phosphate layers, the phospholipid layers, which are these. Nice, clean, easy, smooth. These things can go back and forth like this all by themselves, and you know your heart does this all day long. It's got to be so smooth in there. And if you looked up on a periodic, coefficient of friction, synovial fluids, this is the same thing. It's slurpy, small leucine-rich proteins. Basically, they're slimy. They are hundreds of times slipperier than Teflon on Teflon. It's the most slippery thing there is that I know of, is this goo that's in between this. This allows all your muscles to move. Every single bit of your muscles is a ton of little fibers moving against each other like this all day long, upside down, over, around, and it has to do it smoothly or you get aches and pains. And if you let that stuff settle for a long period of time and you don't move, it turns into gluey stuff, and then you try to move, and of course your heart is going to just continue to work, or you die. But your arms, your legs, your back, you need to do a little bit of stretching. Don't do too much where it hurts. You just have to have enough where that stuff doesn't lock up. And I've talked to, I work with people that do autopsies and things like that, and they tell me that they can tell a person that had back pain and so forth by how tough the fibers are in their backs and wherever they're cut, because normally you can slide the fascia apart, they tell me, with their fingers. On somebody that's very fluid, no problem, they can just slide it apart. Somebody that's got issues, they got to use a scalpel, and sometimes they really got to cut through. It's just like leather, and if it's like leather, you try to pull it, you're going to be painful. So there's a little advice. You see this? This is also on Mars. Continually over millions of years, they think all these sarcomeres, which these are connective tissue layers. Whatever died here, and that was it. Could have taken a couple of weeks, whatever. It's certainly not millions of years. All of this dust, you can tell this is Mars because there is no runoff here. Now, I get a lot of people that for some reason they want to push this flat earth thing. That's fine. Please don't thumb me down because I show planets and things like that. Every time I show this, instantly I start getting thumbs down because I'm showing that these pictures, I believe they came from Mars. Now, you believe anything you want, but show me some respect, please. I am trying to bring about evidence that supports the ancient texts. Now, it may not support your exact version of the ancient text, but it is scientific and it's real. Now, there's no runoff here. There's no water running off. This wasn't taken in Greenland or somewhere, Iceland or anywhere like that. This is on Mars. Otherwise, you would see little tiny rivulets of water that you can't make this. Cannot be done. This has to be on Mars, and it is on Mars. And I've seen all the other things I showed you. The Mars Morse code, all right, which I showed you here up here. Or maybe I didn't show you this. This is the Mars Morse code. Remember those little balls? Here they are. This is a mound, and the straps have eroded. And this, I think I might have mentioned, skin that's pushed together will come together like this. That's skin together. This is stretched skin. The straps erode because they're nothing tough, anywhere near as tough as the balls. And that is the Morse code, because that's being dusted off, just like a sandblaster. Just, you see that? That's not from Earth. And it's not AI, it's none of that stuff. They've been showing this for many years now. Well, since 2015. And I reported this was all biological to NASA in 2015, to the European Space Agency. And that thing's 500 feet across, that artery. Anyway, what we're going to do is go into the stories by Velikovsky. And it's going to be very, very, very disturbing and truly exciting and marvelous and disturbing. Because what was written, as far as I can tell, is very, very, very valid, and everything that you have been taught and I have been taught is just absolute nonsense at this point. And to disregard the evidence and all of my findings with the DNA tests, the CAT scans, the specimens, the bones, the blood, the anatomy, the membranes, the interstitium, the giant hair follicles 2 inches wide, erector pili muscle, sebaceous gland, hair shaft, root, the 2 little dots at the bottom of the blood supply, 2-inch wide hair follicles, 3 foot long fingertip. All of this stuff I have shown over and over and over. And it's time to take this for reality. But my hero, Emanuel Velikovsky, is going to be resurrected here. And I did write a book about him 10 years ago. Hold on. See, this is Worlds in Collision by Velikovsky. I think I already talked about this. They heavily criticize pseudoscience, and they still call him an idiot today. It was an instant New York Times bestseller, topping the charts 11 weeks, being in the top 10 for 27 straight weeks. Despite the popularity, overwhelming rejection by academia of its thesis by the scientific community forced Macmillan to stop publishing. And fortunately, Doubleday was able to take over after a couple months. But by then they had destroyed Velikovsky, and they never let him up again. I think I mentioned this before, but it can't be mentioned too often. I wrote the book about him in 2015, 2016, published 2016, February. The discovery of Mudfossils led to everything about Velikovsky being true. I called it Mudfossils and Velikovsky and Minds in Collision. Worlds in Collision is what he wrote. I wrote Minds in Collision. I have the evidence to support every word he said. Well, not every word. Now, here's where it gets tricky. There are some things that he did say that I do not agree with, and are obviously, in my opinion, not true. However, the vast bulk of what he said has to be looked at in a new light because of the evidence that I'm showing. About the dragons, about the giants, about all of the things that he claimed, about these shots that we can see now. He never saw any of this stuff. He never saw any of that. He never saw the great red spot like this. He never saw any of that. But he did say Venus was born from the feared god Jupiter. Now let me show you something right now, which is a little scary. This is only back to 2019. And this is a 5-day time frame, six days, May to June 1st, May 25th. This is the red spot. It's sloughing off blood. All right? It's sloughing off blood. They said it was sloughing off big red scabs of blood and turning round. That's what happens in the cervix when it gets ready to give birth. That's all I can tell you. I just, whatever is here is here. You take it for anything you want. But that is saying it's sloughing off great slabs of red blood. Or red something. Okay, my friends, I just want to tell you this. You take it for anything you want. This goes back to 2019. This is a 5-6 day period. This is the impact area, and this is the Great Red Spot. And all of a sudden, they noticed all this red stuff was coming out of it, and it was tightening up instead of being elongated, as I have shown you. This is the next day. This is the next day, and it's still trailing all of this stuff off. This is the next day. This is the next day. That's the next day, and at that point, that's still 2019. That's only 5-6 days. What that means, I don't know. This is going to be extremely long. Now, I have gone up to number 9 here, which is chapter 4. And they are quite long, the chapters. It's audio, and I will comment as we go through them. I'm just going to give you a taste of where he starts to talk about the oceans boiling. We've had the impact of Venus and Mars and all that. He's going through a whole bunch of stuff right now, and the Venus chapter 1, and he gets into Mars in part 2, chapter 1, and so forth. But I'm just going to give you a taste of this. Then we're going to wrap it up for today, and then I'm going to go back, and it's going to be extremely long, and then we're going to go through what Velikovsky had to say, because he had better things to say, more accurate than anything that's been written down in history that I can determine. Now, I have a lot to add to this, because I have also done my homework on Ovid and Hesiod and Apollodorus and Plato and Herodotus, all of them, every one of them, what they wrote. And they all had something sort of similar. And I can see that they left a lot out of the Bible and the accepted texts because they were just too crazy. Giants 2.5 miles tall, dragons that covered half of the earth. I mean, it was just crazy to put that there, because you'd never have anybody believe you until the evidence showed up, as it did to me. And it is to you now. So listen to what he has to say. Hold on, here it goes.
The earth burst and lava flowed. The Mexican sacred book Popol Vuh, the manuscript Cachiquel, the manuscript Troano, all record how the mountains in every part of the Western Hemisphere simultaneously gushed lava. The volcano...
You hear what they said? In the Western Hemisphere. That's why I think out in the Grand Canyon area was possibly an impact site.
Volcanoes that opened along the entire chain of the Cordilleras and in other mountain ranges and on flat land vomited furiously. The manuscript Cachiquel, the manuscript Troano, all record how the mountains in every part of the Western Hemisphere simultaneously gushed lava. The volcanoes that opened along the entire chain of the Cordilleras and in other mountain ranges and on flat land vomited fire, vapor, and torrents of lava. These and other Mexican sources relate how, at the closing hours of the age that was brought to an end by the rain of fire, mountains swelled under the pressure of molten masses and new ridges rose. New volcanoes sprang out of the earth, and streams of lava flowed out of the cleft earth. Events underlying Greek and Mexican traditions are narrated in the scriptures. The mountains shake with the swelling, the earth melted. Clouds and darkness, fire, the earth saw and trembled. The hills melted like wax.
Okay, that's all of them had basically the same story. They couldn't all be making up the same story. It's just impossible. A lot of these cultures appear to not have had any interaction with each other, and they all saw the same thing in heavens. They saw the battles in the heavens. I showed you all the things that are floating in the heavens. I showed you all of these body parts. These are body parts. Venus appears to have been born from the Great Red Spot. And Ovid talks about these giant creatures, which were gods, being able to turn themselves into anything they want. And Jupiter, who is Zeus, turned himself into a human being, came down and had sex with the women on Earth. Now, I'm going to leave it at this for today, but my claim is that everything in space, including this Bennu that they went out and brought back a sample, is biology. And Bennu is from a heart. This right here is the sarcomeres. These are the membrane layers. So you got phospholipid phosphate layers, sarcomeres, phosphate layer, sarcomeres. That's it right there. Those are muscle sarcomeres. So that's a muscle bundle. And these are the blocky little sarcomeres. And this is what a heart attack victim looks like. Remember this? Here it is right here. That's what a heart attack victim looks like. And these things can get absolutely enormous. You see these little slabs here? There's connective tissue here, and then there's a gooey stuff that pulls together. This is a heart attack victim. I'm going to show you something. I might have found a gigantic heart attack victim from who knows when. Here it is right here. Look at this. You see those sarcomeres? Those are the sarcomeres here. In between, the red stuff just runs out, and it leaves the blocky little sarcomeres. You see this? That's not normal. That's vein blood. That's not supposed to be like that. That does not run like that, that I know of. I've never seen that before, coming down across, coming down in these big blocky things. I've seen them go this way, not that big. They're usually sort of a thin line in between. Hold on, I think I got better shots. Well, you can see what it is. There's that extremely big blocky stuff. Here's what it is. It's normally a very thin line in between. But this, as you can see, is ripped over here and ripped down again. It basically mimics what we see here. Those are all the little blocky sarcomeres, and all the red stuff ran out of these, left all the connective tissue, but this is the vein blood. This is black and really tough, hard stuff. It doesn't run out like the red blood does. The red just washes out. This stuff doesn't run out. It shouldn't be there. That should not be there. As far as I'm concerned, it shouldn't be there. But we can see it's muscle, that's muscle, that's muscle. That came from this heart because they went down inside, grabbed a chunk, and came back with it as heart muscle.